My aunt leaned in so close I could smell her perfume, sharp, bitter, expensive like everything else about her. She pressed her manicured nails into my shoulder hard enough to leave marks and whispered directly into my ear, "You're lucky we even invited you tonight, Alara. Try not to embarrass us in front of important people." Her voice dripped with practiced condescension, the kind she perfected over years of making me feel small. But this time, something went terribly wrong for her. The dining room had fallen silent at exactly the wrong moment, and her cruel whisper slipped directly into the microphone the servers were carrying past our table. People looked up from their plates. Forks paused midair. Crystal wine glasses froze halfway to lips. The words echoed across the massive dining hall filled with the Rowan family and their distinguished guests. My blood turned to ice as dozens of eyes landed on me, some with pity, some with curiosity, most with the uncomfortable recognition that they just witnessed something deeply ugly. My aunt's face went pale as she realized what had happened. Her carefully constructed image was cracking in real time. And then someone at the far end of the long mahogany table stood up slowly. Lysander Rowan, the family patriarch, 83 years old and still commanding absolute respect. The room held its breath as he rose to his full height, his eyes fixed not on me but on my aunt. Everything in that room shifted in that single moment. The power dynamic, the narrative, the future. My name is Alara Rowan, I'm 24 years old, and this dinner was supposed to ruin me. Instead, it exposed everything my family had spent years hiding. Growing up, I was the girl who existed on the edges of everyone's photographs. At family gatherings, I was positioned just outside the frame or cropped out later. My cousins, Celine with her perfect blonde hair and Arden with his confident smile, shined like flawless marble statues that everyone admired. Praised constantly, adored publicly, celebrated for every minor achievement. Me, I was the courtesy invitation, the seat filler at events when they needed even numbers, the afterthought mentioned only when someone asked, "Who's that girl in the corner?" After my mother died when I was 12, I went to live with my Aunt Mara, my mother's older sister. She took me in, and she made absolutely certain I never forgot for one single day that I wasn't really one of them. Not really family, not really wanted, just tolerated out of obligation to my dead mother. "We're doing this out of kindness," she'd say whenever I needed anything. "Remember that, Alara. Remember who gave you a home when no one else would." I believed her for years, believed I was lucky, believed I owed them everything, believed my existence was a burden they graciously bore. I didn't know yet that my mother had left behind something that made me far more than a charity case. I didn't know that the kindness Aunt Mara kept reminding me about was actually theft dressed up as generosity. But I was about to find out, and so was everyone else in that dining room. The years living under Aunt Mara's roof were an endless stream of comparisons designed to keep me small. "Why don't you dress like Celine? She always looks so put together. Arden would never talk like that at the table. You need to watch your manners. You need to learn how not to embarrass us when we take you places." Every comment was a carefully sharpened needle designed to remind me of my place in the hierarchy. I was beneath them. Less than. Lucky to even be there. I worked part-time after school starting at 15, cleaning houses, babysitting, tutoring younger kids. I bought my own clothes from thrift stores while Celine got designer everything. I bought my own school supplies while Arden got the latest technology. I stayed out of the way, kept my head down, and tried desperately to be grateful for scraps. They never asked about my grades, even though I maintained a 4.0. They never attended my school events, even though Celine's mediocre performances got standing ovations. I learned to expect nothing and somehow still be disappointed. "You're too sensitive," Aunt Mara would say when I quietly tried to express hurt. "We're doing our best with limited resources. You should be more grateful." I swallowed the pain, buried the resentment, told myself it could be worse. At least I had a roof over my head, right? At least I wasn't in foster care. These were the mantras I repeated to survive each day of feeling invisible in a house full of people who shared my blood but not their love. When Aunt Mara invited me to the Rowan Legacy Dinner, a formal black tie event reserved for real family and important business connections, I thought maybe something had finally changed. Maybe I'd proven myself worthy after years of trying. Maybe they finally saw me as one of them. I was so naive, so desperately hopeful. I actually believed the invitation meant I mattered. Until I arrived and realized within minutes that I wasn't invited to be honored. I was invited to be displayed. I was seated at the far end of the table, away from the important guests. My name card was handwritten while everyone else's was professionally printed. I was introduced as Mara's ward rather than her niece, as if even family connection was too much to claim. I understood then. I was the kind of invitation you give a stray dog once it's learned enough tricks. Proof of Mara's charitable nature. Evidence of her generous heart. A living, breathing prop in the story she told about herself. That's when she leaned in with her bitter perfume and whispered those words that changed everything. You're lucky we even invited you. Try not to embarrass us tonight. She meant for only me to hear. She meant to remind me one more time of my place. But the universe had other plans. The microphone caught every cruel syllable. The room heard everything. And Lysander Rowan, who'd been quietly watching from the head of the table, finally had the confirmation he'd been looking for. Ilara, Lysander's voice cut through the uncomfortable silence like a blade. Would you come to the front of the room, please? His tone wasn't angry. It was measured, controlled. The voice of someone who just confirmed a suspicion he'd held for months. My aunt stiffened beside me, her hand dropping from my shoulder like I'd suddenly become hot to the touch. My cousins exchanged knowing smirks across the table. They thought I was about to be publicly scolded, put in my place in front of everyone. They thought this was going to be entertaining. I stood on shaking legs and walked slowly to the front of the massive dining room, past tables of relatives and business partners, all watching with various expressions of curiosity and pity. My heart pounded, so hard I could hear it in my ears. Every step felt like walking toward my own execution. When I reached Lysander, he placed a hand on my shoulder, not heavy like Mara's had been, not cruel or controlling. Steady, grounding, almost protective. Tell me something, Ilara, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. How did you manage your mother's estate after she passed? The funds she left specifically for your care and education. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. My aunt's wine glass trembled in her hand. Her carefully painted smile cracked at the edges. Because she knew. She knew exactly what was coming next. And for the first time in 12 years, I saw fear in her eyes. I pulled out a slim folder from my bag, documents I'd been carrying for weeks, ever since Lysander had first contacted me privately to ask questions about my living situation. Transaction logs, printed from bank statements I'd requested. Email confirmations I'd found in my mother's old files. Legal documents outlining the trust fund my mother had established before her death. Every single withdrawal Aunt Mara had made over 12 years, supposedly for my clothing, education, healthcare, and living expenses. Thousands and thousands of dollars meant specifically for me. But the money never reached me. Not 1 cent. I bought my own clothes with money from part-time jobs. I paid for my own school supplies. I covered my own medical expenses with what little I could earn. Meanwhile, the trust fund was being systematically drained. I laid the documents on the table in front of Lysander, my hands steady despite my racing heart. Every withdrawal is documented here, along with proof of what the money was actually used for. Gasps spread across the room like wildfire. My aunt's face drained of all color. Lysander examined the documents with the precision of someone who'd built an empire on attention to detail. His expression darkened with each page. Private school tuition for Celine and Arden, he read aloud. Family vacations to Europe. Down payment on a vacation home. Designer furniture. Luxury vehicles. He looked up at Mara with ice in his eyes. All paid for with funds explicitly designated for Ilara's care. Funds you told this family were insufficient to properly provide for her. The room erupted in shocked whispers. My uncle stared at his plate. My cousins looked genuinely stunned. What I revealed next sent another shockwave through the room. Lysander hadn't just suspected financial impropriety, he'd been investigating for months. I hired a forensic accountant 3 months ago, Lysander announced to the room. I've suspected mismanagement of family trusts for some time. I just didn't know which family member was responsible or how deep the deception went. He gestured to me, until Ilara provided the final pieces of evidence I needed. Aunt Mara had been using my mother's estate to cover her children's private school tuition, their elaborate vacations, their college funds, their cars, their designer wardrobes. Everything they had that made them shine so brightly was purchased with money stolen from me. For 12 years. While telling me I should be grateful, she even gave me a place to sleep. While making me feel like a burden. While positioning herself as a charitable saint, taking in her poor orphan niece out of the goodness of her heart. You stole from a child, Lysander said, his voice deadly quiet. You stole from your dead sister's daughter. You used her inheritance to fund your own children's privileges while making her work part-time jobs to buy school supplies. The weight of those words crashed over the room. This wasn't just financial misconduct. This was profound betrayal. Moral corruption. The kind of thing that destroyed reputations in families like ours, where image was everything. And it was happening in front of everyone who mattered in our social circle. The collapse of their carefully constructed image happened in real time. Celine covered her mouth with both hands, tears forming in her eyes. She genuinely believed her mother's story that they were barely getting by, that money was tight, that they were making sacrifices. She hadn't known the sacrifice was mine. Arden muttered a curse under his breath and pushed away from the table like he wanted to disappear. My uncle, Mara's husband, stared at his plate as if he could will himself into non-existence. He'd known. I could see it in his face. He'd known and said nothing. Mara started spinning excuses, so fast the words tangled into incoherent nonsense. Ilara misunderstood the financial arrangement. The trust was complicated. She never asked for accounting. I meant to discuss it with her when she was older. We took her in when no one else would. She owes us for providing a home. The money went to household expenses that benefited everyone. Each excuse contradicted the last. Each explanation fell apart under the weight of documented evidence. She was drowning and everyone could see it. Lysander silenced her with a single look. The kind of look that had made grown men reconsider business deals and politicians change their positions. Enough, he said quietly. I've heard enough lies. He turned back to me, and his expression softened in a way I'd never seen directed at me before. Ilara, I owe you an apology. We all do. You were family, and we failed to protect you. We allowed this to happen under our noses because we didn't ask the right questions. That ends tonight. You will repay every stolen cent, Lysander said, turning back to Mara. His voice carried absolute authority, with interest calculated from the date of each withdrawal. I've already had the family attorneys draw up the paperwork. You'll sign it tonight, or I'll pursue criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Mara's breath hitched. Her perfect composure shattered completely. She looked around the room desperately for support, for someone to defend her, for anyone to say this was too harsh. No one moved. No one spoke. She was utterly alone. And until the debt is fully repaid, Lysander continued, Ilara will sit at this table's right hand, the seat of honor traditionally reserved for the family member most trusted and valued. He gestured to the chair immediately next to his own, Aunt Mara's chair, the chair she'd occupied with such pride for decades, the position of power and influence within the family structure. Mara, you'll move to the far end, where Ilara sat tonight, so you can remember what it feels like to be treated as less than. The room broke into whispers, some shocked, some approving, some clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the punishment, but unwilling to challenge Lysander's authority. I stood there unable to fully process what was happening. In one evening, my entire reality had inverted. I wasn't the charity case. I wasn't the burden. I was the victim of theft, and the family was finally seeing me, not as an afterthought or an obligation, but as someone who mattered, someone who deserved justice. 3 weeks after that dinner, Aunt Mara showed up at my apartment door. I'd moved out of her house immediately, taking only what was truly mine, which wasn't much. Lysander had provided a temporary stipend while the legal proceedings moved forward. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. No designer clothes, no perfectly styled hair, no confident posture, just panic and desperation radiating from every pore. Ilara, please. We need to talk. Her voice shook. I have nothing to say to you, I said, starting to close the door. She stuck her foot in the gap. Please, just listen. Tell the family it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I'm paying you back and we've reconciled. I can't lose everything over this. The country club membership is being revoked. Friends aren't returning my calls. Arden's scholarship is being reviewed because of questions about the source of our income. Please, I'm begging you. I looked at her, really looked. This was the same woman who'd told me I should be grateful I even existed, who'd made me feel like my presence was a burden for 12 years, who'd stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars meant for me and used it to make her own children shine while keeping me in the shadows, who'd whispered cruel words to remind me of my place. And now she wanted mercy. She wanted me to lie to make her comfortable. I opened the door wider, just long enough for her to see inside my small apartment. See the folder of documents still sitting on my kitchen table where I'd been reviewing them with attorneys. See the life I was building without her. See that I'd survived despite everything she'd done. You're lucky I even opened the door at Mara, I said softly, echoing her words from that dinner. Her face crumpled as she heard her own cruelty reflected back. I'm not going to lie for you. I'm not going to minimize what you did. You made your choices. Now you live with the consequences. I closed the door slowly. Finally. Completely. And I stood there on the other side, feeling the weight of 12 years lifting off my shoulders. I didn't feel victorious exactly. I felt free. Free from the guilt she'd layered on me. Free from the obligation to be grateful for scraps. Free from the desperate need for her approval. She'd spent years making me feel small, and in one evening, the truth had made me bigger than she could ever diminish again. The legal proceedings moved forward. Mara was required to repay the full amount plus interest, over $300,000. Assets were liquidated. The vacation home was sold. Vehicles were returned. The family attorneys ensured every penny was accounted for. Celine and Arden had to transfer to public school. They lost the privileges purchased with my inheritance. It wasn't pleasant to watch, but it was just. And justice, I was learning, sometimes requires discomfort. Lysander placed me in an apprenticeship program within the Rowan Family Foundation, a paid position in their charitable trust division. Not out of pity or sympathy, but because I demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and attention to detail the position required. You survived people who should have protected you, he told me during my first day. You documented truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. You stood up for yourself when you had every reason to stay small. Those are the qualities we actually value in this family, even if we fail to show it. I wasn't the stray dog who'd learned tricks anymore. I was the person who'd survived the wolves and come out stronger. And now I sit at the same family table that once tried to shrink me, not as a courtesy invitation, not as an afterthought, but as someone they can no longer ignore. Someone they respect. Someone who proved that the truth, when documented and spoken clearly, is more powerful than years of carefully constructed lies. My cousins and I are slowly rebuilding a relationship. They're not responsible for their mother's choices, and they're genuinely trying to make amends in small ways. My uncle divorced Mara 6 months after everything came out. Apparently embezzlement and public humiliation was his breaking point. Mara herself is working 2 jobs to make restitution payments, living in a small apartment, experiencing for the first time in her life what it's like to struggle. I don't take pleasure in her downfall, but I don't lose sleep over it either. I learned something profound through this experience. People will try to make you feel lucky for basic decency. They'll frame exploitation as generosity. They'll tell you to be grateful while they steal from you. And if you stay silent, if you accept their narrative, if you believe you deserve the crumbs they throw you, the abuse continues. But the moment you speak truth, documented, undeniable truth, the power shifts. The lies crumble. The real story emerges. If you're reading this and you're living in someone's shadow, being told you're lucky for what should be your right, being made to feel like a burden when you're actually being used, document everything. Keep records. Trust your instincts. And when the moment comes to speak your truth, speak it clearly and let the evidence speak with you. Because the people who spend years making you feel small are often the same people who have the most to hide. And sometimes, all it takes is one whispered cruelty caught by the wrong microphone for everything to change.